Hi everybody, Randy Wong here. I'm back after a long hiatus. I appreciate your watching and for your support. Today we're going to talk about Robert Clouse. As many of you know, Robert Clouse directed Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee's timeless masterpiece. Enter the Dragon catapulted Bruce Lee to world fame and international stardom. It is the Gone with the Wind of martial art films, and it is the crowning achievement of Bruce Lee's cinematic legacy. I met Robert Clouse in 1980 at his home in Santa Barbara, California. At the time, my best friend Ken Lowe and I drove up to Santa Barbara from Los Angeles, and Robert Clouse graciously welcomed us into his home. He had a ranch-style home, and we sat in his living room for 2 hours. His wife, Ann, made us coffee, and we had the greatest time, the greatest discussion. Both he and his wife, Ann, are just wonderful people. I mean, they're down to earth, they're unassuming. I mean, just great people, and we just had a great time with them. Ann Clouse, unbeknownst to us, she is an accomplished set designer. In fact, when we spoke, Robert told us that when they went to Hong Kong to film Enter the Dragon, she went along basically just to sightsee and to shop. But it ended up that her talents were utilized on the making of the film. Fred Weintraub, the producer of the film, contracted her to help with the design of the sets. Most notably, she designed the trophy room, the weapons hall. If you remember, that trophy room was the visual centerpiece of the entire movie. I mean, it had all these ancient Chinese weapons displayed on against the walls and in glass display cases. There was Han's bladed hand, the blades that Bruce would encounter in their final battle in the film. And then again, there was that skeletal hand, the hand that was the souvenir, the severed hand of Han. It was just, I mean, the idea itself was just, the concept was incredible. It just made that film. Warner Brothers production team was made up of two people, Fred Weintraub and Paul Heller. They were the producers. And the producers of Enter the Dragon, they were motivated to basically create and sell a product. They thought Kung Fu was a commodity, and they knew that Kung Fu was hot, and they thought that Kung Fu was a fad that was going to fade away quickly. So their goal was to get in and get out quickly. Get in, make the film, get the heck out. If they can each make $50,000, great. So that was their motivation. There were times during the filming that Bruce Lee said to Robert Clouse, "Hey, there's only two guys that care if this film is any good at all. And those two people are you and I." Because Bruce knew that the producers were only looking to make a quick buck. He knew that they were not concerned about quality. And of course, he was. That was, Bruce Lee was all about delivering the best product possible, becoming the best not only of himself, but of anything that he touched and anything that he worked on. And Bruce Lee felt that only Robert Clouse felt the same way. When the film was being shot, raw footage was being sent back to Warner Brothers in Hollywood to be processed and developed. Bruce was able to view what was being shot, and when he saw the raw footage, he realized that that he was going to make it, that this film was going to be the monumental hit that he knew it could be. And it's just tragic that he didn't live to see it. He knew it when the film was being made, when he saw what was captured on film, but he didn't live to see it. Enter the Dragon was released on August 17th, 1973 at the Groundless Chinese Theater in Hollywood, California. Bruce Lee died July 20th, 1973 in Hong Kong. Bruce Lee died less than 1 month before the film was released internationally. Just a tragic, tragic story. During our time with Robert Clouse, we asked him what were his first impressions of Bruce Lee when he first met him. Now, before Enter the Dragon, Robert Clouse had no idea who Bruce Lee was. He signed the contract to direct a film, and all he knew was that Bruce Lee was a martial artist and a rising star in Southeast Asia, but that's all he knew. He knew nothing else about Bruce Lee. So when we asked him, what were your first impressions, he paused and he thought. And then he came back with 3 things. First, he said Bruce Lee was intense. Second, Bruce Lee was on fire all the time. He was always on. And 3, he said Bruce Lee was an egomaniac. And he added, and that was confirmed once they started filming Enter the Dragon. So, and we all laughed. And Robert Clouse had another story that he shared with us about his first time meeting Bruce Lee. He said Bruce Lee had a greeting card, a way of meeting somebody for the first time. So when they first met, they shook hands, and then Bruce Lee took 2 steps back, and then he flicked out his foot, a kick, towards Robert Clouse's face. And Robert Clouse felt Bruce Lee's foot just graze his nose slightly. And then he felt a puff of air, a puff of wind, as the foot was retracted and pulled back. And the speed and precision at which the kick was delivered to his nose, to Robert Clouse's nose, Robert Clouse just had no time to react. He was just stunned. He just stood there. And as he stood there, Bruce Lee looked at him, smiled, and said, "Hey, let's go eat lunch." So that was Robert Clouse's intro to Bruce Lee. It's hilarious. Bruce Lee also had a way of greeting women, but it was very different. Ann Clouse told us the story of her meeting, her first meeting with Bruce. She said that Bruce was charming, very gentlemanly, and a bit coy. But she said that basically they shook hands, and then Bruce offered his arm to her and said, "Would you please feel my arm?" And she said, "Okay." And so she felt his arm, and she said that his arm did not feel like human flesh. I mean, it was, first of all, it was rock hard. But she said it didn't feel like flesh or muscle. And she said it was like running her hand over warm marble. Amazing. I can only imagine. But those were the stories that Robert and Anne relayed to us. Just, I'll never forget it. One last thing. During the conversation, we asked him about Bruce Lee's legendary speed. And this is what Robert Clouse had to say. He said that Bruce Lee had the fastest reflexes he had ever seen. He said Bruce's hand and foot speed were unbelievable. And he further explained that when they were filming Enter the Dragon, there were certain scenes where they had to speed up the camera to 32 frames per second. They had to speed up the camera because at normal filming speed, in certain scenes, you couldn't see Bruce's movement. He was just too fast. It didn't register on film. So one example he gave was, Robert Clouse said that when they filmed the face-off between Bruce Lee and Bob Wall, who played O'Hara, where they faced off, and Bruce crossed arms with O'Hara. And after they crossed arms, Bruce Lee unleashed a flurry of blows at Bob Wall, causing Bob Wall as O'Hara to drop to the ground. During that scene, that was one scene where they had to speed up the film because Bruce's movements were just too fast. They couldn't capture it. It wouldn't register on film. It could not be seen unless they speeded up the film in order to capture it. That's the story that he told us, and I mean, there's no reason he would make that up. It's an amazing story. Another story to add to the legend of Bruce Lee, and this is all true. So this is the first video of my discussion with Robert Clouse. There's going to be a part 2. So this is the first part of a 2-part video series on Robert Clouse. So stay tuned. If you like what you see here, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Don't exit out just yet, because following this, I have put together a series of behind-the-scenes shots of Robert Clouse and Bruce Lee on Enter the Dragon, which I think you enjoy. So stay with me. But I will see you again on the next video, and thank you so much for your support. I do appreciate it. We'll see you again. Thank you.